Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, and another Jonathan who will be showing this video a little bit later, Jonathan Fink. Welcome, Mr. Fink from Silicon Curtain.
Great to be back. And we didn't fall out during our marathon, so we decided that we can still do these. 12 hours of marathon didn't kill the relationship.
I forgot that was the last time we hung out together. Yeah, that was an absolutely superb accomplishment. Well done to you for sorting all of that out. You are a legend. So we are going to talk about something discrete today, like a particular breaking news topic, and that is that Kirill Dimitriev, one of the envoys, the person in the Russian administration who is responsible for kind of economic development, has been involved in negotiations heretofore. He is at the moment in the United States, it appears. So this is on the back of the Russian-American summit is likely to be postponed. So Putin saying that the meeting between Trump and Putin is not going to take place in Budapest as was originally thought. And Putin said that the new sanctions will not significantly impact our economic well-being. So he's like playing down the effects of the sanctions. Before we talk about Dimitriev and him being in the US, what are your thoughts on the sanctions as a whole?
I think as a whole, we don't want to overhype them, but I think the detail of the sanctions is interesting. They seem to be taking a harsher tone than others. The episode that's going out before this one, actually, so if people see Timothy Ash's interview, his point was that the UK actually introduced the Lukoil and Rosneft sanctions last week. But there was no reaction from the oil markets and no real media coverage of that as an event. I certainly missed it. It's not until the US jumped in that we're actually seeing it trigger changes in the oil market, a sort of 5% spike in crude prices. So it seems that the UK doing a unilateral move does not have any clout really here. It's only when you have a coordinated approach from multiple entities, and of course the EU is not yet on board, but potentially now there's pressure for them to adopt the same package.
But good on the UK. I'm not saying this just way, check me out, I'm a Brit. But good on the UK for actually doing that. And we wouldn't expect the UK to have such a massive impact in sanctioning those two entities as the US would have. But, you know,
maybe it's challenges all over again, something symbolic, but which nonetheless, prompts others into action. And now there's pressure from the US. We know that the EU has released their 19th package of sanctions. There's some significant stuff in there, but they are not yet sanctioning these two entities in the same way as the US and the UK. But of course, now the pressure is building for Europe to do the same. So I think it's significant. The key is going to be, I reckon, in two things. One is really in the secondary, and we're going to come to that. But the other thing to watch for is whether this just fizzles out. And in the implementation period, there's plenty of room for, dare I say it, Taco Trump to sort of kick in. So those are the two things I think to watch out for. Are these going to get hardened in terms of sanctions and broader, or are they going to get weaker? That's the key thing to watch.
Yeah, you were talking to me just before we came live that you've just interviewed Timothy
Ash. Not Garton Ash, no, Timothy Ash. He's a very vocal sort of economist on the issue of sanctions, and he's a Chatham House fellow.
Right, and he was, from what you were saying, he was saying things that were somewhat similar to Phillips O'Brien. I talked about Phillips O'Brien as the military historian and analyst, who was saying that actually these sanctions aren't quite what they're cracked up to be, although I think they have had a positive effect. He was saying that actually there's 4 weeks before anything really happens, and then even when they do happen, there are a lot of may result and runs the risk of being sanctioned, and you'll find loads of modal language, may risk, and actually they're not definite, so there's a lot of wriggle room there for the US not to be as officious with these sanctions as you might otherwise think. And also,
let's face it as well, Russia's really good at getting a little wiggle room. Russia, these might actually have an initial harsh impact, and then Russia finds workarounds. And unless we're playing whack-a-mole and bashing those workarounds in a timely fashion, then we might see Russia being able to circumvent them over time. I think that's the other thing to note.
Yeah, so 2 key sentences here from Phillips O'Brien. So who knows if any of these sanctions are even in force in 4 weeks, and then the threat of secondary sanctions could be seen in this light. It's a secondary sanctions are almost arguably more important than primary sanctions. So, you know, looking at other countries who are taking on Lukoil and Rosneft products, so on and so forth.
I tell you, I'd love to see what you think about this, Jonathan, but I think it's often, you know, rather than these sort of slightly sort of dry economist-style reactions, actually the best judge of whether a sanction is potentially going to have an impact is to watch the Russian reaction. And I know you're going to come on to Dimitriev in a minute, but the fact that they have sent, you know, administrators, diplomats, or whatever, almost immediately over, that tells us an awful lot, actually, that these are maybe have a bit of bite to them.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's broadly going to be the thrust of this video. Is that okay? So what's the news?
I've ruined it, haven't I? I've
ruined no, but
spoilers,
you're absolutely right. You're spot on. Which is, you know, if you have an unannounced visit from someone as high up as Dimitriev, right, and he's been given special dispensation, the US government temporarily lifted sanctions against Dimitriev to allow the State Department to grant him a visa to come to the US. So already there is this acceptance from both sides that this is a serious meeting, right? Then one can assume that these are going to have a much bigger effect on Russia than they are letting on.
And the choice of person is important. They could send some kind of diplomat or technocrat to argue against sanctions, but what is Dimitriev's role? He is the big juicy worm on the hook, as it were. His role throughout this has been to propose often ludicrous or overblown business projects. He's the guy that puts the big fat deal worm on the hook to try and entice Trump. He's the one who will communicate, let's say, some of these ludicrous ideas are completely uneconomic and fantastical, to say build a tunnel between Russia and the US. You know, really barking mad stuff. But it nonetheless gets Trump's attention because the idea of a deal, the idea of some economic kickback or whatever, this is his role here. So I think it's significant that they've sent him and not anybody else.
Yeah, very much so. So let's have a look at some of the details from the CNN. So Kirill Dmitriev, the head of the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund and a Kremlin special envoy, is expected to meet Trump administration officials to continue discussions about the US-Russia relationship, according to the sources. The visit comes amid growing US frustration over the Kremlin's refusal to end its war in Ukraine, and after Trump said he had cancelled a planned summit with his Kremlin counterpart Putin. The Trump administration on Wednesday imposed sanctions on Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, as it called on Moscow to agree on an immediate ceasefire in a war with Ukraine. Putin said the sanctions will have little impact on the Russian economy, of course, and then immediately sends his guy to try and sort them out, describing them as an attempt to put pressure on Moscow. Well, of course they are an attempt to put pressure on Moscow. That's exactly what they are. No self-respecting country ever does anything under pressure, he said on Thursday, and that is just complete bollocks.
Russia will only do something under pressure, only under the most extreme pressure.
Yeah. Yeah, and Zelensky's been very forthright about that. It's like the only way, and many analysts have, the only way you stop Russia is to stop Russia, like to forcefully stop them. They will not otherwise, you know, determine, you know, or I forget the word, I can't think of the word, but they will not stop themselves, right? They
won't.
Yeah, and so. Yeah, Dmitriev, who has been a prominent Kremlin advocate for closer economic cooperation between Russia and the United States, recently proposed the construction of a Trump-Putin tunnel between Alaska and the Russian Far East. So that is Dmitriev. That's what's going on. He's going to be on the way, or is on the way, or is in the US. I'm not wholly sure at the moment. But here's my question. Do you think there's a case for, because I oscillate between there is outright compromise on Donald Trump and there not being, that he's just a useful idiot. As soon as the sanctions are put in place, I ask my audience this question. It's like, does this mean that there is no compromise on Trump? Because if the Russians had compromise on Trump, then he wouldn't do something so forthright as this. or, you know, and so I was expecting Russia to like either threaten Trump with compromat in some way, or it shows that they don't have compromat, and he should have just put these sanctions on the US on Russia far earlier, but hasn't done so because he's just aligned with Putin. He likes strong men and all this stuff. But if Kirill Dimitriev is going so quickly to the United States and is going to meet in person with some of these people, or Trump or whoever, do you think this is an opportunity to remind Trump in person that indeed they do have compromat?
I mean, there are rumors, of course, that Putin dropped an extraordinary bombshell or threats or behaved in a manner that shocked some of Trump's team in Alaska. That is the allegation, but we don't know what that relates to. It could be just, dropping the nuclear threat, making sort of outrageous, unhinged kind of threats, saying that we'll nuke the world, we'll burn the world if we don't get Donbass. That is part of Russia's classic reflexive control. Make the world think unhinged, but actually are rather calculating. It could be that. It could be a reminder of compromat. I've stopped framing things in terms of compromat because I'm not sure it's actually useful anymore to get hung up on that, to see. I think it's much more important to look at the alignment and to look at Trump's aspiration. I think his aspiration is to be a king amongst kings. And here it's much more maybe useful to look at in terms of, a mob turf war, right? You're a mobster. You understand the rules by which the game is played, and you're more aligned with your fellow mobsters than you are with, say, law enforcement or government. It's a criminal alignment, as it were. And what we're perhaps seeing here is just a tussle over the pecking order and the hierarchy and who emerges as the king of kings. I think looking at alignment is more important, because you can say that there's this temporary tussle. What Trump may be, and it's all speculation, of course, because none of us inside his head, none of us have seen the Epstein files. But I think Trump wants to get to a world where he can happily start carving things up, putting pressure, and stealing the election in the US, consolidate his position. This Ukraine war stuff is getting in the way of his grand plan, getting in the way of his grand schemes to earn an absolute packet from being more aligned with Russia. And he cannot understand why Putin is continuing this, because it makes no transactional sense to him. But he hasn't got around to trying to figure out what makes Putin tick. Putin understands how he ticks, more or less, but he doesn't understand what motivates Putin. So I think we're looking still here at a misalignment, a miscommunication, but the long-term view is that their broader interests are aligned, and that is to have a informal power mafiosi carve up of the world.
I pretty much agree entirely with you. I mean, for me, it's both and, right? So, this is the both useful idiot because he's aligned so much with Putin and that kind of imperialistic worldview that it makes him very easy to manipulate by Putin. So, yeah, absolutely. I think there's an alignment there. And I think there's also questions to be had over Project 2025 and their kind of idea of a worldview and how that fits with Trump. Because like my working thesis at the moment is so much can be understood in terms of why did Trump pivot on Truth Social back a few weeks back during the UN General Assembly. And that was a Truth Social post that he didn't write. It was impossible for him to have written it because he was giving a speech in the UN. He then went through a one-on-one with Zelensky and then a one-on-one with Macron. And then suddenly this massive piece is written on Truth Social. And then the sanctions. And I'm wondering there, because the other day he said, well, I'm not sure that they are going to win. I think I said they could win, but, I don't think they will win. So then he's pivoted on what he previously said. So he didn't say that. So my working thesis is that there are two worldviews in I wouldn't call it the Trump administration, in the government. Okay. You've got the Project 2025 Donald Trump view of isolationism, transactional thinking, want to take Greenland, want to take Panama, want to take Canada, that kind of thinking, and the imperialistic thinking that you're talking about, carving up the world. and then you've got the Pentagon and the intelligence services outside of like the purges that are attempted to be, taking place under Pete Hegseth. But even Pete Hegseth is actually not a big fan of Russia when you listen to what he said when he was a Fox News anchor. So you've
from
got,
the tie's a little giveaway there, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think more and more he's probably being surrounded now and influenced by the kind of Project 2025 lot. But I think you've got these two worlds existing in the American government at the moment. And the Pentagon world is vying to have things like sanctions put in place to give Ukraine the permission to fire these. So we've heard that actually decision making, according to Wall Street Journal, has gone from Pete Hegseth in terms of firing missiles or allowing British Storm Shadow missiles to be used, but actually using American targeting. We understood that the decision making has gone down to European-based American military commanders, right? So
that's really significant. I mean, that's barely covered at all. My friend Joseph Lindsley pointed out just how significant this is, but we're not quite sure the politics behind the scenes of that.
So my view is that is the American military administration winning with their worldview and their influence, or maybe doing things under the radar that Trump doesn't understand. Trump doesn't understand that he can actually say, no, you can't fire European missiles, because he doesn't understand ITAR, like the ability to use weapons with American technology in, and he doesn't understand like targeting requirements that where the US is it's contingent upon permission from the US to fire these things, right? So I don't think Trump understands that, and that decision making has gone down the chain or across the chain into Europe with American military leaders. I think it's huge, right? But it means that you've got a little bit. If we do have this fight between the kind of traditional neocon, kind of understand, maybe old school Republican understanding or militaristic understanding of geopolitics and the state of the war, and you've got this isolationist Project 2025 world, I think that this fight explains why Trump is often two-faced here, because actually he's got his core beliefs, and then he's got when someone in this other world is writing through social posts for him or making decisions unilaterally.
It could be that they've been quite successful at hollowing out the Pentagon, and this is an attempt to circumvent or bypass let's say those Darren, what word you use? I mean, corrupt is that the right word? But use the sort of MAGA elements that have co-opted the Pentagon and used its natural sluggish bureaucracy to sort of make the wheels grind even slower. But I think it is indicative of a struggle that's going on between the heart and the soul, or the brain and the heart of the MAGA sphere. It is absolutely fascinating, and I'd like to. Well, I'll be potentially interviewing some interesting people over the next week, and this is military people, and this is one of the things I want to bring up because I think this is hugely significant. And it's interesting. This all comes in the days following another failed attempt, or initially successful attempt, but ultimately failed attempt by Putin to try to manipulate and coerce Trump. We saw Trump reputedly absolutely berated and harangued Zelensky using a stream of expletives to try and pressure him. That suggests, direct influence from Putin. I mean, other person who I know who is intimately aware of, let's say, the New York mafia-driven type negotiation in the real estate industry. He says what you don't get here is that this is a negotiating tactic of sorts. This extreme bullying and taking of extreme positions and flip-flopping between this and that is a demonstrable strategy to wear down your adversaries or people you're willing to, want to do a deal with until you get them into the right ballpark. That is maybe over-intellectualizing what Trump is doing there, but I think this has been a fascinating week.
Yeah, fascinating in so many other domains as well. I mean, I won't go too much into American politics, but my goodness, what an insane landscape that is over there at the moment.
Leveling of that building, you know. I mean, you and I know that, and this is something doesn't really get aired too much in here because it's all highly partisan, but you know that in the UK, if you live in a conservation area, you couldn't even alter a window frame or a sash or anything, or put any bricks or roof tiles out of place if it doesn't match. The idea that you can pull down a historically significant part of your key government building without going through due process, without going through any kind of review process, even budget reviews and submitting and getting approval for the replacement, that none of this has been done. I mean, the argument seems to be mostly hedging on the loss of architectural heritage, which is significant. I think it's more significant is the absolute impunity to ride a coach and horses through any legal and legislative process. Absolute
Anything and everything. At the moment,
impunity.
He's pushing the envelope on literally every single sector of American politics and society. He's pushing the envelope, and he's getting away with it. And this is just, it is quite.
It's
incredible.
The lack of pushback. It's the total impunity that is the real story here. Yeah.
And it's almost, and this is Steve Bannon's kind of fire hose. Where if you do everything all at once, then. If you did one thing and then waited a couple of months, did one other thing, and then a couple, everyone can coalesce around this one idea and either support it or be against it, and you can, build up a defense to this one thing that's being enacted. But he's doing just 20 things a day. It's like, he's knocked down the east wing of the White House. Meanwhile, he's shut down the government. Meanwhile, he's done this. Meanwhile, he's done that. So, what do we focus on? And also the fact that the government shut down, it means that actually politicians aren't even around to do, and then there's the Epstein files, and then there's
to cover up that distraction from that. I mean, there's a great comment in here saying he's flooding the zone. Yes, he is, but we also have to remember that the midterms are coming up, and they've also got their eye on 2028 and the next presidential round. I think they're preparing the ground for what can we do? Let's get people used to the idea of troops on the street. Let's see how little pushback we get legislatively, legally, and from various institutions. They're testing the waters for a full-blown constitutional coup, in my view.
So absolutely, and they bought Dominion voting machines. The previous Republican election person has bought the company that they thought would help to steal the 2020 election. So they're gerrymandering, they're doing all this. But where I was going originally with what I was saying, and why I brought Steve Bannon in, is that Steve Bannon said the other day, yet again, but even kind of more forcefully in an interview the other day, that Trump will be ruling after 2028. That it's just like it by divine right or whatever it is. So watch what people like Steve Bannon say. Do not ignore them. The reason that Project 2025 is as successful as it has been in terms of a legislative and political agenda is because people have been following Steve Bannon's fire hose approach, flood the zone approach. And if he's saying that Trump will be ruling in 2028, then I think that's clearly going to be their intention.
Or at least have him begin. I mean, there's a comment there that his body's not going to make it out through a full term, and that may be the case. But they at least want the process to be done so that they can then hand over to say Vance, who is uncharismatic and would be unlikely to win and to really turn out the electorate in the way that Trump unfortunately is able to. Vance will simply not carry it because he's just such an uncharismatic, unsympathetic, fairly obscure character, actually, when you actually hear him speak.
Yeah, just to let you know, breaking news here reporting from Bloomberg initially. Trump's sudden shift in stance on Russia was prompted by an assessment by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a longtime supporter of a tough policy toward Moscow, who once called Putin a gangster. Rubio also cancelled a planned in-person meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov after they spoke on the phone, and it became clear that the Kremlin was again trying to slow down the talk. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much the case. Someone
little Marco's growing a pair, is he?
Yeah, it's about time. So someone asked as well, Grunge Thing, Ronnie here, so it's curious what will come out of the Russian central bank meeting today. Fingers crossed for a depression. Will they have reduced the interest rates to 16.5%, 0.5%, I think, reduction from where they previously were? The best person to follow with regard to economic stuff, certainly on Blue Sky, is someone called Prune60, who is updating all the time with regard to what's going on there. So if you're on Blue Sky, in fact, I'm showing it to you now, Prune60 here. Here is where you can watch the Russian central bank meeting with English translation while it is live, and then giving an update there. So maybe I should have a look at what's going on. Where was I? The other thing I want to just say, but before we kind of move on or start wrapping things up, Stephen Bendell, thank you very much for 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. I always have to say thank you for these people who are helping keep the lights on. Thank you. Joe Hales, just waiting to get home to Sussex by the Sea, had an epic time in South Africa, and thanks as always for keeping me updated. Really hope these sanctions hit hard soon, and that we might have to wait, some weeks for these sanctions to start really taking effect, but when they were announced, China and India supposedly, like, straight away were changing their behavior or looking to change their behavior. So, that was another sign that actually the sanctions can be seen in a positive light, that we won't have to wait 4 weeks, and it might not just be a may or can or could have a risk of.
I think that's exceptionally interesting. I mean, that's the most interesting aspect. You'd expect them to get angry and push back, or maybe hold and wait for the taco, but no, there seems to be a fairly immediate response.
But then they could have misinterpreted the immediacy of the sanctions themselves and read, may risk and may and all those kind of modals as just it will happen. And actually, what China and India will be looking to do is find as many loopholes as they can, as much elbow room as they can. So if that sanctions press release can give an inch, then they will take a mile. So yeah, there is that.
And they're not stopping supplying Russia with critical war components. We've got to remember that. I mean, Russia would not be waging war if it wasn't for China and its proxies at this point. It would be incapable of mounting the offensive operations that it's been doing at least for the last year and a half, maybe 2 years even.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've heard the latest here. Russia is fitting its UMP-B5R guided glide bombs with Chinese SW800 Pro White turbojet engines, increasing their strike range to around 130 kilometers. Photos confirm the engines used in recent attacks on Poltava and Lazova. So these are bombs that are now going, well over 100 kilometers. And they're talking about, the Ukrainians admitted the other day that they are working on getting them up to 200 kilometers, the Russians. So the upgrade allows Russian aircraft to launch from beyond the reach of Ukrainian air defenses. I had someone saying saw someone saying that, hey, these Gripens are going to be up in the air, even if they get these Gripen CD variants, they're going to be up in the air and shooting down Russian planes. Well, no, the Russian planes aren't going to be close enough. If they can drop these guided glide bombs from a good 100 kilometers behind the front lines, you're not going to be putting Gripens close to the front lines to try and shoot these down. No. So, I think the Russians are doing a very clever thing of obviously taking in Chinese components, but really pushing the limits of how far they can drop these guided glide bombs from.
And this has huge implications both for a ceasefire, which may turn out to be, the lines may get frozen, but Russia can still, chuck ordnance over the fence, as it were. It has huge implications for a potential drone/missile war against Europe, combined with hybrid operations. I mean, that's probably a conversation for another episode. Just reading a book, What If Russia Wins, which I'm not sure if you've seen that one, by a sort of German-Italian academic, outlining a sort of war game scenario of Russia invading NATO territory.
Yes, you're breaking up for me.
What's happening?
You're breaking up quite a lot for me, and my internet is fine, so I don't know if yours is.
I was breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah,
that could be. Is it a bit better now? Is it?
Yeah, definitely better now. Yep. Yes. So on the guided glide bomb thing, I know that's not what we're supposed to be talking about, but Rob Cook says, not to be pedantic, but how is that still called a glide bomb? I mean, missile drone with a remote bomb deployment. Yes. I mean, as they change, we keep hearing the term drone missile as well for things like the Peklo drone missile, which is like, it's hybrid between the both. And whatever we call them, they are munitions that can be thrown from a plane and go a good old distance. And indeed, Bellyman here says Meteor range. And the Meteor is a missile that can be fired certainly for the from the Gripen E, and I think, well, no, sorry, certainly for the Gripen CD, and I think they will be on the Gripen E anyway. Correct me if I'm wrong, but these are air-to-air missiles that are very good air-to-air missiles that go 120 kilometers, but they're thought to be able to have a range of over 200 kilometers. But even at 200 kilometers, right, you're not going to want to put a Gripen within too close a distance of the front line. And if they're releasing these bombs from 100 kilometers behind the Ukrainian front lines, then you're going to be, really at your limits probably in terms of how comfortable you're going to be flying those Gripens to shoot those down. That said, I hope that they do have the Meteor, and I hope they do get the Gripen soon, and that they do shoot down some Russian jets for sure.
And there was another piece of news. So you had the oil sanctions, you had this transfer of sort of procurement authority, really significant, didn't get much coverage. Another one that didn't really get a huge amount of coverage was the removal of all limitations on the use of deep strike munitions provided by the US.
That's what I was saying before. That decision was from the SACEUR, was from the UN. So the Wall Street Journal talks about that decision being from the US commanders in Europe rather than Pete Hegseth. But then the question is, well, were they ever, because there were Storm Shadows that were used into Russia in the Biden administration, and this happened after the North Koreans were brought to the fore, and the Russians brought in the North Koreans to fight in Kursk, and then Biden said, right, that's it, we're going to allow Ukraine to use ATACMS, and they can use ATACMS into Russia. ATACMS don't go too deep into Russia. They've only got a sort of 300 kilometer odd range, but that was the decision from Biden at the time, which also allowed Storm Shadows to be used, and Storm Shadows were used. Then you had this incident last week where Bryansk was hit, or this week, I don't know.
Well, that was a major strike. I mean, that was a pretty big one, actually.
Yeah, but again, Storm Shadows being used in the same way that they were used under Biden. But what I think used to happen under Biden is you had a case-by-case permission structure going on. So I guess we just don't know. We don't know whether the US gave extra permissions for the Storm Shadows to be used, or whether the Storm Shadows were being used based on previously existing permission structures that were put in place under Biden as a result of the North Koreans, or whether this is totally new.
Or whether it's fully devolved. Yeah, we don't know whether it's fully devolved command, or whether you can even do that with the intelligence data that's required. You may still have to put through a request. I doubt whether you just have, complete access to all intel. So there's quite a few unanswered questions there. The other one, of course, is, well, what's the stock of these things? Because often under Biden, they would give permission, but only at the point where it was known that actually effect would be limited, because actually you don't have many of these things left. So it looks like a benefit, but it's fairly mealy-handed, as it were. Again, we don't know what the stock of Storm Shadows or other deep strike munitions are.
Yeah, and there's a big question over the manufacturing of Storm Shadows. They kind of stopped the manufacturing in the UK, but they do have what are called midlife update adaptations to existing missiles to make sure that they can last another 10 years or whatever. But I don't think we're making new ones. There are claims that this French Scalpy G is still in production to some degree. There's talk about Taurus, but I would love there to be manufacturing of Storm Shadows and Scalpy Gs going on under the radar, and getting them out to so there was a coalition of the willing meeting today with Starmer leading it, with Zelensky having gone to the palace.
Just ended, apparently. They've just walked out of number 10, says one of the comments.
Right. Okay. So I think this is super important because Keir Starmer came out saying exactly the right bloody thing this morning, which is this is all about giving Ukraine long distance missile capabilities, but or words to that effect. That's exactly what Ukraine needs, and they need an absolute ton of it from anyone that can help them with that. Tomahawks are a big no, it seems, from the US, but there are other nations who operate the Tomahawks. Would they be able to use them?
Taurus is a no still. It's very disappointing.
So yeah, but then, you know, if this coalition, the willing meeting, is all about that, then we, you know, fingers crossed, hopium copium, could you get a situation where Taurus are going to be allowed, and maybe not signposted, but they're getting them quietly, a bit like the Gripens. And could you have Storm Shadows going on their way? We know that the UK put out some time back a tender for people to be able to produce ballistic missiles at a pretty competitive price rate, right? So we know that the British are, and I'm sure others are too, but are very much up for providing weapons, I presume, to Ukraine. This won't just be for Britain. They're putting a tender out to get people to present cheap long-range weapons so that the Ukrainians can use them, because that's desperately what they need now. Yellow Buga drone manufacturing facility has to be blown up. Tomahawks could have done that. They've not been allowed. Something else needs to do that. It's evident that the Ukrainian drones are not a big enough threat. Even though they do have the range, they're not a big enough threat to properly destroy that warehouse, that production warehouse. That needs to be absolutely taken out, 100%. So I think the coalition of willing meeting today hopefully is going to be all about that.
Tackle the archers, not the arrows. Well, tackle both, but obviously don't just let the archers off scot-free. No, I think that's absolutely key, and we should watch this space. I mean, European unity is key. We know Mark Rutte is, to my mind, he's a troubling figure, prepared to play the game of appeasing Trump. The key thing will be, is that it? Or is there actually useful stuff happening behind the scenes? And Rutte is simply a sort of a distraction operation. It worries me that you know, this is the Rutte show, and that there's no substance behind the words, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, and just last bit on missiles. So Tomasz says the Gripen can carry the Taurus. I believe it's in advanced development for carrying the Taurus. So I'm not 100% sure it can absolutely carry the Taurus at the moment. I presume the Taurus is carried by, otherwise would have been carried by the Tornadoes and then Eurofighter Typhoons. But I think the Gripen, they are working on that, and that's going to be imminent. So yeah, just a few thanks here for Krabat 391. Thanks for the super sticker all the way from Norway. Thanks for Richard Bennett, total legend, gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. That is super cool. Thank you. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see what the outcome will be from the coalition of the willing meeting. I don't know if, I presume they're not giving a presser, if it's just thought that he's just walked out of number 10 rather than getting together with Starmer and giving a press briefing or press conference. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. And I think the important stuff, as ever, probably will be unannounced. And we didn't even get, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we'll catch up on, including oil sanctions and the mass desertions that seem to be starting to take place in Russia. There's a whole bunch of stuff we'll have to save for the next stream, I think, because there's so much craziness going on.
Yeah, then you got, I mean, I did a breaking news update first thing this morning on Canada and the US halting trade agreements with Canada due to, well, prompted, it seemed, by an advert that the province of Ontario put out talking about how tariffs are kind of stupid, using the words of Ronald Reagan. Trump called it fake and fraudulent or whatever. It's no, Ronald Reagan, it was what he said, and the recording's there for everyone to see. But anyway, trade negotiations stopped. Now we're hearing Mark Carney. I think Canada and Carney are going to sign massive trade deals with China and other Asian countries coming out of America. I don't know if that is looking like it's going to happen. So Mark Carney, we can't control the trade policy of the United States. We recognize the policy has fundamentally changed from the policy in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. And it's a situation where the US tariffs against everyone on where every one of their trading partners, what we can control is developing new partnerships and opportunities, including with the economic giants of Asia. So just pushing Canada further towards otherwise their adversaries. So yeah, lots and lots to talk about. Here's something that might be interesting, pertinent to what we've just been saying, Jonathan. Gazprom majority-owned oil company, NIS, which runs a network of 350 gas stations across Serbia, and the country's only refinery, will likely be forced to shut down operations within the next week due to US sanctions. The refinery supplies 80% of Serbia's gasoline and diesel. Wow. So that does happen. That is a big old impact there. So there you go. I don't know anything about the coalition of willing meeting yet, and I've not seen anything on Zelensky coming out of the meeting, so I'm desperate to find out about that.
Well, we'll catch up on that, and I'll look forward to your analysis of that one. And then I think, yeah, maybe in the next one we'll tackle the fragmenting or the crumbling elements of Putin's regime, including what seems to be a massive discrete mobilization, which is kicking off, which seems to be a wholesale looting of the system by insiders and the elite, and first signs, at least, of some kind of crumbling of the army through desertions, starting to reach some kind of significant sort of scale. The estimate is around 10% of army strength losses, as it were, could now be assigned to desertion as opposed to death and injury. But these are all ones I think we should gather some information and insight and sort of bring it to the table for our next one.
Yes, and the only other thing I'm going to mention, just as a kind of breaking news thing, it might be of interest, hopefully, to the audience, because I've talked about this a number of times. You've probably thought a little bit about this. So there's been a big China spy trial that's been taking place in the UK that then fell apart, and then it fell apart because it was very quickly a reminder of this. So the UK previous government was a Conservative government, and two of these people were arrested for kind of espionage. One of them was actually an advisor to, or an aide to, a Conservative politician, I think, at the time. One of them was a teacher. Anyway, they were kind of prosecuted under the 1911 Official Secrets Act, which essentially says you've got to call China an enemy in order for these guys to be found guilty of doing what they supposedly did. And this was then cemented when the Bulgarian spies on behalf of Russia were found guilty, and that was by calling Russia the enemy, etc., etc. So this fell apart. The Crown Prosecution Service decided not to take it further on because no one wants to call China the enemy. But if it had been prosecuted under the 2023 newer legislation, then they could have been prosecuted. So it fell apart. Now the Conservatives and Reform are blaming Labour, and Labour is saying, hang on, we weren't the ones that put this prosecuted this initially in 2023 and then 2024. We were not in power at both of those times. And at the time, the Conservative government refused to call, and explicitly so, both, James Cleverly, who was then Foreign Secretary, and Kemi Badenoch, who was in the cabinet, who's now the leader of Conservatives, both explicitly said they are not a foe, they're not the enemy, they are a challenge, blah, 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 blah. So it would have been impossible for this to have been prosecuted successfully. And so Labour did only what they could do. Now, there's I just want to add to this, because this has just come out, that it turns out, as someone says, effing hell, cold hard evidence that the China case collapsed because of the actions taken under the previous government. So breaking news, the Deputy National Security Advisor then, under the Conservatives, Matt Collins, elected to remove the reference to China as an enemy in his evidence to prosecutors ahead of the China spy trial, so ultimately resulting in its collapse. Officials referred to China as an enemy in the draft of his statement, which was drawn together between August and December 2023. Drafts of the statement provided to the the DNSA included the term enemy, but he removed this term from the final draft as it did not reflect the government policy, etc., etc., etc. So now you have absolute cold hard evidence that it collapsed, nothing to do with the present government. They were just like, that there was nothing you can do about it, because no one wants to call China the enemy right now. That would be too controversial. But anyway, it needs to be re-prosecuted under a 2023 piece of legislation. That's the end of it.
And to be fair to both, there's been a wholesale, dare I say, appeasement or unreasonable tolerance of China by both the previous government and the current one, who've sought to make deals. So this is a systemic problem. This isn't a left-right only kind of issue.
Yeah, thank you, Daryl Thomas. It's really kind of you. Greatest job, guys, he says. And something that, and I'll leave you with this, something that Rory Stewart said the other night in The Rest is Politics with Alistair Campbell. He said, look, we just need to admit that every embassy is a spy hub, right? Just whether it's Chinese, Russian, British, French, American, that's what you do. You're spying. Everyone's spying on each other. And there's this kind of like argument that we should just accept that spying is what happens and then prosecute people accordingly, but you don't necessarily have to call them the enemy. It's like, if you're caught spying for France aren't the enemy, but you should still be prosecuted for spying because you're giving away state secrets to the French, who are otherwise friendly to us, but that's not cool. So accept that spying is something that happens, and you don't have to be an enemy state in order to have spying take place. I mean, this is the whole idea that Germany spying on the states, or the states spying, whatever. Under Merkel there were all sorts of controversial claims, if I can remember that correctly. Anyway, everyone spies. Is
Merkel controversial claims?
Yeah.
Surely not.
Yeah. There you go. Well, look, mate. There we've a somewhat quick video, all things considered. 46 minutes. This is certainly a record for me.
What, a record short one? I mean,
yes.
Because you do usually ramble on, isn't it? I don't know how you sit there on your own, just sort of rambling into the screen. It's very impressive. I can't do that. But we covered a lot of stuff. We covered a lot of ground in 46 minutes, I think.
Absolutely. Well, look, thank you for coming on live with me. I wanted to talk about this. I was going to do a breaking news just on my own as a pre-record, but then you phoned up, literally phoned me, and then a beautiful thing happens. The magic happened just like that. And just to let people know, we are looking to do some more of a weekly scheduled podcast, so we don't sort of miss out on the opportunity to bring the Johns together. So people should watch out for that. We'll kind of announce date and time. And it would be good to bring you on to a weekly one I now do with David Debato, a former CIA sort of intelligence officer. You've probably seen his channel. And then there's Yuri Rashkin, who's got a really good perspective on the sort of Russia angle. I'd love to get you onto one of those. So we're going to do a lot of mixing things up, I think. Yeah, no 12-hour live stream today, Paul. But
today, not every day of the week.
Well, yeah, not every week.
Well, we think you're doing that monthly. I mean, because we there's a lot of fundraisers, a lot of stuff, and the need is urgent. So I was thinking maybe we could, actually do it on a monthly basis. Ooh, that is intense. That's a big call. We'll talk about that. But yeah, so look out for a regular live with the two Johnnies, the two Jonathans, and we'll label it appropriately and give you a time and a place, and you can all come and hang out with us. Thanks for the beer money, F Oink, and Hungary. Goodness me, I'm trying to say goodbye. My famous long goodbyes. It's all going off it was all going off in Hungary yesterday with the Republic Day march, pro Orban, pro Hungary nationalist march, and then you had the Magyar anti-government march, and there were loads of people there for that, and so it's all happening there. Those elections. I'm hoping to get a Hungarian politician on next week, an opponent of Orban's, so that could be very, very interesting. Watch out for that. Oh yeah, super cool. Well, look, thanks everyone. Thanks, Jonathan. You take care, and I know that you're going to be just ripping this video off my channel, but I am just going to do this nonetheless. Because I can. I'll probably edit that out, or deface it in some way. Complete bastard.
Take care, Mr. Fink.
I'll
and
have
take care,
an
everyone else.
airplane with me in it wearing a crown, and I'll defecate all over it, something like that. Yeah.
Only the most heinous human beings would think about doing something like that. Only the most awful humans on earth.
Most the vile specimens. Yeah, exactly.
Toodle pips, everyone.